Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Guarding His Princess by Yahrah St. John. Narrated by Nixon. Prologue. 6 months earlier. "I'm sorry, Cameron, but you'll never fly again," the doctor said, looking across the desk into Cameron's hazel eyes. "The injury you sustained changed your vision, and there's no way we can get you back to the 20/20 vision you'll need in order to fly for the United States Air Force." Cameron sighed audibly. He wasn't surprised by the expensive ophthalmologist's statement. He met with 3 eye specialists, but he'd been hoping against hope that they were wrong, and that somehow, some way he could go back to doing what he loved. But the injuries he sustained from the plane crash several months ago effectively ended his career as a pilot, which meant he wasn't fit for duty and would be honorably discharged. Cameron was still in disbelief. All his life he wanted to serve his country, as his grandfather, Carter, father, Cal, and his brother, Caden, had done in the Army, and his brother, Cage, in the Navy SEALs. And for a while he had. Cameron had put on the uniform for 8 years. But it was all over now, and he would be getting his walking papers. He was bitterly disappointed and didn't know what to do with all the anger he had growing inside him. One person, however, came to mind. His mother. He'd been stunned to learn she'd cheated on his father, or at least the man he'd always thought of as his father. Apparently, when Cal had been deployed, she'd gotten pregnant with another man's child and passed Cameron off as his son. His ancestry made sense now. Growing up, he always wondered why his complexion wasn't brown or dark chocolate like his father, or brothers Caden and Cage. Cameron thought he favored his mother with her smooth, vanilla skin. But the eyes. He'd never known where his hazel eyes came from because they didn't run in the Mitchell family. Now he knew. He must have inherited it from his paternal side of the family. Sometimes Cameron thought about finding out more about them, for health reasons if nothing else. But learning his entire life was built on a lie was like a fresh cut that hadn't quite healed over. Cameron wasn't ready to pull off the scab to delve in deeper. Maybe one day. Since he'd been released from the hospital, he had no interaction with his mother, despite her repeated calls and texts. Today, however, she was standing outside of the specialist's office waiting for him in front of her custom Mercedes-Benz. "I can't talk to you, Mother," Cameron said, walking past her to his Jeep. "Not today." He'd heard the most devastating news of his life and needed time to lick his wounds in private. His mother didn't take the hint. Instead, she followed him toward his Jeep, putting herself between him and the driver's side door. "Cameron, I know you're upset with me, but it's been months. Months of me patiently waiting for you to give me a chance to explain." Cameron's brows furrowed into a frown. "And say what? What exactly can you say that will make knowing the man I have looked up to my entire life is not my real father? You allowed him to raise me for 3 decades and never said a word to either of us. Instead, you kept this dirty little secret to yourself." I know, baby, and I shouldn't have." His mother sniffed. "I should have told you when you were older and would have understood." "Understood what?" "How lonely I was when your father was deployed," Camilla stated. "I never intended on having an affair. I loved your father. I still love him, though I know he finds that hard to believe. But I do. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But that doesn't negate how much I love you and want to care for you during your time of need." "There is no time of need," Cameron replied, "because there's nothing that doctor," he pointed to the building behind him, "or anyone else can do to put me back together again and give me the vision I need to fly a plane. Are you happy now? Now you know everything." "Oh, darling," his mother sighed. "I'm so sorry. I know that's not the news you were hoping for, and I can see that you're hurting." "Wouldn't you be?" Cameron yelled. "My career, the life I planned for myself, is over. I don't have a backup plan. The Air Force was it for me. And it can still be. Just because you can't fly." Cameron held up a hand. "Just stop right there. I don't want to hear that. I can't hear that right now. Will you just please move out of the way and let me leave?" Tears welled in her eyes, but Cameron felt nothing. He just felt despair. "I know you don't want to talk to me, but you have to talk to someone. You can't keep this rage bottled up inside." "Anger is all I've got right now," Cameron replied. "And if I want to hold on to it, it's my right. You don't get to tell me what to do, not anymore. You, who have always held yourself up as some paragon of virtue and esteem. But you're nothing but a liar and a cheat. Stop calling. Stop texting. I don't want to see you." His mother covered her mouth with her hand and wept. Quietly, she stepped away from the Jeep, and, tearing his gaze away from her, Cameron climbed inside and turned on the ignition. He drove away, leaving her standing alone in the parking lot. Cameron knew he was being unconscionably cruel, but he couldn't help himself. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He wasn't in the right headspace to have that conversation, but she'd forced his hand. Now they would all have to live with the fallout. Knock, knock. Cameron didn't want to answer. After leaving the doctor's office, he stopped off at the liquor store and picked up a 12-pack of beer along with his favorite whiskey. Hours later, Cameron was well on his way to tying one on, and that was just fine with him. He was wallowing in self-pity and recrimination. He was so far gone, he didn't notice that his father, Cal Mitchell, had used his spare key to enter his bachelor pad. The 2-bedroom apartment was an investment property, a place he could hole up after finishing one of his tours. It was roomy enough and had all the essentials: a large reclining sofa, entertainment center, and the cocktail table Monet convinced him to buy way back when. Cameron's eyes rolled back in his head. He didn't want to think about his ex-girlfriend, who was now in love with his brother. He'd made his peace with it, but he couldn't think about how happy they were. Not tonight. "So you've decided to drown your sorrows," his father stated, sitting on the opposite end of the sofa from Cameron, who was sprawled out on the other end. At least half a dozen empty bottles of beer were strewn across the floor. "What's it to you?" Cameron was spoiling for a fight and didn't care with whom. "I'd like a beer if you have one to share." Cameron reached into the cooler by the sofa and pulled out a cold brew and handed it to Cal, the man he'd thought for the last 32 years was his father. "Thanks." Cal twisted off the top and took a long pull. Then he turned to look at Cameron. Cameron knew he must look a mess. The last time he'd bothered looking in the mirror, his eyes had been bloodshot and he had several days' growth of beard. If he'd been on duty, it would have been a big deal. Being clean-shaven was expected in the Air Force. "How long are you going to keep feeling sorry for yourself?" Cameron snorted. "As long as it takes." His father cocked his head and stared at him. "I get it, Cam. You got a raw deal. First with Cage stealing your lady, and now losing the ability to fly, but—" "Enough about Cage, Dad." Cameron sighed. "I've made my peace with him and Monet. You need to, too. She and I were over long before they got together. Should they have told me they wanted to pursue a relationship? Hell yes. But it's water under the bridge. They love each other. So, if they're happy, who am I to hold a grudge?" "You're a better man than I am, son," Cal responded. "If I'd discovered your mother's infidelity back then, I don't know where we'd be." Cameron glanced at him sideways. "Where are you now?" "Honestly, that's all I can take right now." "I'm not sure. On the one hand, I want to divorce her because my life has always been about duty, honor, and loyalty. But yet, we have 40 happy years together. Do I throw the baby out with the bathwater? The same applies to you, you know." "How do you figure?" "I know I may not be your biological father," his father said, "but you are and will always be my boy. You're my son, and no DNA test is going to tell me otherwise." Tears sprung to Cameron's eyes. He hadn't known he needed to hear those words, hadn't known how he might feel. But they were exactly what he needed most in the moment when he felt like his entire world was falling apart. "Dad." His voice broke, and Cal instinctively moved closer until he was pulling Cameron into his arms and holding him tight, just like a father would a son. Cameron appreciated Cal making it clear in no uncertain terms he was his father. However, after he left, it brought Cameron back to the present. What was he going to do with his life? His grandfather, Carter Mitchell, was a retired 3-star general in a high-level position at the Pentagon and owned a security firm. He could easily offer him a job, like he had Cage. But Cameron wasn't ready for that. He had to get away, regroup, and figure out his next move. The phone call he received later that evening couldn't have come at a better time. It was his good friend Khalil Naseer, a former Air Force Academy friend. Khalil had an American mother with blonde hair and blue eyes, and his father just so happened to be the king of Bahara, a small country in the Middle East. Khalil didn't have much of a relationship with the king because his parents divorced when he was young. His younger brother Malik was the crown prince because Khalil's father remarried and took a native wife who came from royal blood. The king put all of his efforts into Malik, while Khalil, although the eldest and should have been next in line for the throne, was left to his own devices. Khalil was able to do as he pleased. After 4 years of serving in the U.S. Air Force, Khalil had gone on to acquire great wealth after investing in several lucrative business opportunities. He was now a self-made millionaire. "Khalil, it's been a long time," Cameron said, answering the call. "Yes, it has, my friend," Khalil said from the other end. "How are you?" "Shouldn't I be asking you that?" Khalil inquired. "I heard from Brett that you were injured during a routine flight." "Yeah, I was." "And? What of your injuries?" If Cameron could be honest with anyone, it was Khalil. He'd been in the trenches with Cameron and understood the struggle it took to become an Air Force pilot. I won't ever fly again. Damn! I'm sorry to hear that, Cam, Khalil responded. I know how much flying means to you. It meant everything, and without it, Cameron was floundering. It's a shock I haven't really come to terms with yet. So that means you haven't made any decisions about your future? Khalil inquired. His question surprised Cameron. That's right. Why? Well, Khalil sighed heavily, and there was a long pause. Whatever it is, you can tell me, Khalil. We've never kept secrets from each other. No, we haven't. And this will come out soon enough, although the palace has tried to keep it under wraps. But the Crown Prince's plane carrying him and his mother went down in the desert a few hours ago. There's a rumor it was a planned attack against the royal family. Oh my God, that's horrible, Khalil, Cameron replied. Did they find the wreckage? Did Malik survive? That's the thing, Cam. The Crown Prince is presumed dead, much like I might have been if you hadn't risked everything to find me when my plane went down while I was in the Air Force. The assumption is I'm next in line to rule Bahara. A member of the Royal Council showed up to my office and demanded my immediate return to Bahara to take my rightful place as heir to the throne. What? As you know, my father died a few years ago from a stroke. There's no one else. I'll have to step in, but I'm woefully ill-prepared for this role. Malik was the Crown Prince. He was groomed to be king one day, not me. Not anymore, Cameron stated quietly. You're the next king of Bahara. His statement was met with silence. What do you need from me, Khalil? How can I help? I need someone I can trust to stand by my side. Someone who can look after my sister. Sister? That's when Cameron recalled Khalil had a younger sister, nearly a decade younger. Yes, Amani, Khalil answered. We have to be sure this wasn't an attempt on the royal family. Until we do, I need to keep her safe at all costs. Can you come? I need you. Of course, Cameron replied. He could help a friend in need and distract himself from the wreckage of his own life. I'll be there. 1. 6 months later. Princess Amani, are you excited to be opening the new girls' school in the country? One of the reporters asked Amani as she exited the limousine surrounded by 4 bodyguards, including Cameron Mitchell, the one man she wished would look at her like a woman, rather than a job. Amani gave a small smile, like she'd been taught during her decorum classes. It was never a good idea to smile too brightly or reveal too much teeth for the cameras, her instructor always said. This way. Cameron moved their convoy onward, and Amani waved at several spectators as they swiftly passed through the halls. Amani was used to Cameron's high-handed nature because he was the head of her security team. It had been that way for the last 6 months, since her brother Malik, the Crown Prince, and her mother had been killed in a suspected attack against the royal family. Since that time, her older brother Khalil Naseer, the true heir to the throne, had come home to Bahara and taken over as king. Amani was still filled with grief. Losing her mother in such a fashion was traumatic, but they'd never shared a close relationship. Queen Fatma had always doted on Malik, her father's second son, and raised him to be the crown prince. Malik was stoic in front of others, but with her, he'd always been fun and lively. Growing up in the palace with him had been a delight. Despite her station as a woman in a predominantly male-led country, Malik never made her feel unimportant. But Khalil was different. He was serious and rarely smiled. Though Amani doubted he had much to smile about these days. Since Malik's death, he had to overcome hard odds. There were some members in the Royal Bahara Council who thought of Khalil as an outsider, because his mother was an American, and he hadn't been raised here. Amani remembered his visits when she'd been younger. Her mother would be in a fit of jealousy if their father spent too much time with Khalil. Eventually, Khalil's visits became less frequent, until eventually Amani no longer saw her older brother at all. And now that he was king, there was a rift between them that Amani had no idea how to overcome. It didn't help that he'd brought an outsider into their midst to oversee her every waking minute and ensure no harm came to a hair on her head. Cameron Mitchell. From the day he'd arrived, Amani had been mesmerized, not just by his tall stature at 6'2", which equaled Khalil's own 6'3", but because he was by far the most gorgeous man she'd ever met. Smooth, butterscotch skin with hazel eyes and a slim yet athletic figure. Cameron spelled hunk with a capital H. Whenever she tried to make eye contact with Cameron or engage him in any sort of conversation, he kept her at a distance. Why? Did he sense her attraction to him? Did she wear it on her skin like a bad cologne? Amani thought she was doing a good job of hiding her interest in the dashing bodyguard who, right now, wore a custom all-black suit with a Baharan insignia on his left lapel, which showed he was part of the Royal Guard. One time, when she'd been on a rare holiday weekend for a few days last month, they'd gone to the beach, and it was so blazing hot in the desert, Cameron had to take off his usual suit gear and wear comfortable clothing more suitable to the desert. When he'd put on light-fitting pants and a white shirt, he'd looked every bit the dashing rake Amani imagined him to be in her fantasies. And she fantasized a lot. She'd been raised in the palace, and although she'd gone to finishing school in Switzerland, she'd had a sheltered upbringing and was never allowed to see inappropriate things. She was a princess, after all, and was supposed to remain a virgin until the day she married a man her family deemed a suitable match. Amani understood her obligation, but she didn't have to like it, and so she rebelled against the grain a bit. She snuck romance books into her finishing school, and the stories she read made her more than a little hot and bothered. What would it be like to have a man like Cameron kiss and caress her, like the men did in the pages of one of her romances? She desperately wanted to know, but she doubted she would ever find out. Cameron was always stone cold and unfathomable. Amani wondered what or who had made him become so impervious. Perhaps one day she would be able to sneak through his defenses and learn more. Damn her, Cameron thought. The little minx, with her long, thick black hair cascading in soft waves down her back. Those full, bee-stung lips, almond skin, dark caramel brown eyes surrounded by lush lashes he could lose himself in. Amani Naseer was one gorgeous-ass princess. Every time Cameron was around her, he had to remind himself of his position. Khalil had brought him to the small island country because he needed someone he could trust. After the death of his father, and now the crown prince, Khalil was worried about losing his remaining family. He was keeping Amani and his mother in America, heavily protected. How would it look if he got involved with Khalil's sister? It was wrong on every level and was why Cameron protected Amani with a long-handled spoon. He couldn't let her get too close. Yet as he watched her hips sway as she walked ahead of him, Cameron couldn't deny she was sexy as hell. Focus, Mitchell, Cameron told himself. He mustn't let himself get sidetracked from his goals. Khalil brought him here to find out who was behind sabotaging his youngest brother's plane. 6 months later, they still had nothing. Despite going over the evidence and the wreckage, there hadn't been anything to confirm or deny Malik's death wasn't accidental. But Khalil still wasn't sure and asked him to stay on. Cameron would do everything in his power to protect Amani, but her beautiful smile and sweet perfume sometimes made him want to throw caution to the wind and sample her. The entourage paused in front of the computer lab, where the girls in the country would be given access to top-of-the-line computers and formal education. He'd been stunned when Amani informed him that for years she hadn't been given access to any sort of technology, let alone a computer, phone, or even a television. Cameron would never understand a country's reluctance to allow women the same sort of freedoms men had. He was glad Khalil was changing that. In the meantime, he had to keep his wits about him where Amani was concerned. Once they arrived at the auditorium where she would give her speech, and after Cameron and his team had checked the room, Amani went to the small podium. I'm so honored to be here today for this momentous occasion. Women's education is very important to the king. He's determined to bring Bahara into the future, so this will not be the only school of its kind. After her remarks, Amani took a few pictures with the principal, along with several students in hijab, before leaving the school. Cameron was right there waiting for her. Instead of going to the front door, he had an alternate route. Where are we going? Amani asked when he led her away from the entrance. We have to do the unexpected. Everyone anticipates you'll exit through the front and someone could stage an attack. This way gives me more control. And control is important to you, isn't it? She quipped. Cameron turned and stared at her. Her dark brown eyes were alight with amusement. She knew she'd struck a nerve. Control was important to him, now more than ever, and not just because he was her bodyguard, but because everything in his life upended the last year. He'd loved being a pilot. It had been part of his makeup for so long. But he'd found a new dream and a new purpose. He was focusing on that and not looking back on what could have been. He and his team quickly moved Amani and her maid, Nadia, down the hall until they came to a series of corridors. When he found the one he wanted, Cameron opened the door and led them down to a secret back entrance where the limo was waiting. Very covert, Amani said, as he helped her and Nadia inside. Cameron didn't respond. He couldn't because he was too busy reminding himself not to think about the sexy curve of her bottom. Aren't you coming? She asked. No. He closed the door behind her. There was no way he was sitting in the back seat with Amani. The smell of her perfume was too intoxicating and would drive him wild. Spending too much time in her company spelled danger. And this was a surefire way to remedy the situation. Why does he continue to ignore me, Nadia? Amani wondered aloud, once they were alone in her quarters. It was opulently decorated with a bedroom, ensuite bath, living room area, kitchen, and a private terrace which faced the desert. Because he's here to protect you, Amani. Nadia wasn't just her maid. She was her assistant and confidant. Half Baharan and half African-American, Nadia had come to live in the palace after her parents were killed in a car crash.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?